we kind of developed a mantra, which was don't hire till it hurts.
If you can get someone who wants to pay for a bad product, it's exciting because you know they're going to pay when it gets better.
To see $1 million in a bank account, I never seen that before.
Today, I'm interviewing Wade Foster, the founder and CEO of Zapier. I think that Zapier is one of the most interesting companies to follow in the age of AI for two reasons. First is what they've built, and then second is how they built it. So first on what they've built. One of the big questions in AI is how are agents going to automate work? And if they're going to automate work, they're going to need connectivity to all of the software systems. And Zapier has spent 10 years building integrations into over 8,000 different services. Everything from Salesforce to Google Drive to MailChimp and a lot more. And then on point number two, how they built this company. Zapier only raised $1.5 million before getting profitable in their first 3 years. It used to be cool to raise a lot of money, to hire a lot of employees. Now, thanks to the affordances of AI, it's the exact opposite. As someone who's founded a venture firm that focused on investing in companies at the pre-seed and the seed, I am increasingly seeing some of my best companies choose to take the Zapier route. Raise as little money as possible and make as much progress without growing headcount or raising gobs of capital. This is a great conversation for anyone who is interested on where AI is headed and also how you should think about building a company differently in the age of AI. This is going to be a great conversation, so let's dive right in. So excited to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rex.
I want to go back all the way to the very beginning. You built the company a little bit differently than might have been, the received wisdom at the time. So where does the founding story for Zapier start?
Yeah. Zapier starts in fall of 2011 in Columbia, Missouri. The bastion of venture capital. I kid. There's like no money in Columbia, Missouri. But myself, my co-founders, we're working at this company, Veterans United, which is a mortgage company in central Missouri. And they operate their business very differently. The company was owned 50-50 by two brothers. When I joined, I was employee 500. When I left, 10 months later, starting Zapier, they had over 1,000 folks. And, they broke a lot of the conventional wisdom about how you grow a company, how you build culture, all bootstrapped. And this wasn't the first time they'd done it. They had two other companies that they had grown the same way and sold and had like a lot of success. And so, Zapier has that as like our formative example around how businesses are made and grown, etc. And when we start the company, it happens because Brian happens to notice like, hey, folks are needing to integrate these apps in the community forums, etc. We think we can do a better job at this. This is a product I would use because I'm not a very good developer. We're like, great, let's go do it. Well, how do you start a company? You just start working on it. So nights and weekends, We're working on Zapier, day jobs at Veterans United, and let's just see if we can go make a thing of this.
I want to drill down to the story of the very first Zap you ever created because it starts with a cold email and a product that doesn't exist. So let's talk about that first Zap, and then we'll talk about how you scaled the company from there.
So we built the first version, a prototype of Zapier at a startup weekend. After that, we're working on it for a few weeks, and the product, it technically exists. So saying it doesn't exist is not 100% true, but on the spectrum of like, does not exist to like scaled and successful, beloved product, it's a lot closer to does not exist than it is the other. But we're like, okay, we need to go get some feedback from folks who can go try this. So, we're just like poking around the internet, seeing if anyone's like complaining about this problem. And I come across Andrew Warner, who has a popular podcast, Mixergy. We'd listened to it at the time, but he's on this like it's like power users, like a sub forum that like is on the Stack Overflow site asking for a PayPal high-rise integration. And I'm like, oh, great. Like we're helping with integrations. Andrew's like kind of got a platform. Wouldn't that be cool if like he happened to like be into our stuff? And so I track down his email and I shoot him a note and say, hey, Andrew, did you ever find a PayPal high-rise integration? If not, like I'm working on something that might be able to help. Let me know. He emails back and he's like, hey, thanks for shooting up me a note, Wade. I actually solved the PayPal high-rise things, but, I am curious, like, do you have something? Are you working on this? And so I was like, oh, yeah, bummed that he didn't need us, but I was like, hey, he left the door cracked. So I'm like, if there's something else I can sort of sneak in there, maybe we could catch his interest. And so I'm poking around his site. I'm noticing he's using Wufoo for his forms. And I notice he's got Aweber as his email tool. And I say, I follow up and I say, hey, Andrew, yeah, we're working on a tool to help you integrate all the tools you use. So not just PayPal High-Rise, it's also things like Wufoo, Aweber, and then I listed off like three other things just to see if I could catch his attention.
Play it cool, I'm not stalking your website.
Exactly. Definitely no internet stalking going on here. And he emails me back and he goes, oh, I actually do need something to integrate Wufoo and Aweber. I want to get all these contacts from my site into my email newsletter, and I'm having to upload these things every single day. And so I was like, oh, great. Emailed or like chatting with Brian and Mike. I'm like, okay, we need Wufoo and Aweber integration like today, if you can do it. And so like that night they plug Wufoo Aweber into the stuff, and I email Andrew back and I say, okay, great. We can help you out. Here's a link where you can get started. Give it a go. Let me know what you think. And he's like, awesome. A couple days go by, not really sure. Did he use it? Did he not use it? Etc. But luckily he emails back and he's like, hey, Wade, thanks for this. Looks pretty cool. Do you think you could get on Skype and, maybe show me how to use this? I'm having a little trouble getting started. So I'm like, sure. Jump on Skype and, watch him trying to set up a Wufoo to Aweber's app. And as I'm watching him, it's not going great. And it's not because of Andrew. Like, he's doing things that, like, a normal internet user would use. It's because the product is just not very good yet. And so we're going along step by step, just like I'm unblocking him every step of the way. But eventually we get to the end, Zap's set up, and we're like, let's go try this thing. Let's do a test run. So he goes to his site. He, submits his contact details to the Wufoo form. We go into Aweber, refresh the page. Boom. There his contact details are. And his reaction is like, holy cow, Wade, this is awesome. How much money do I owe you? And I'm like, wow, this is incredible, because I just watched him struggle to just basically use the product at all. And his end result is elation. And that was a total contrast to this like company. I had a startup before that was like the exact opposite experience, like slick product, great design, all that sort of stuff. And nobody wanted to use the thing. And so it really was like a light bulb moment to me where I'm like, I think we're working on something that actually matters. And I'm like, if we can actually get good design on this thing, good user experience, etc. I think we're onto something.
Yeah. If you can get someone who wants to pay for a bad product, it's exciting because they're going to pay when it gets better.
Totally.
And there's so many founders, you build something, you're excited to take it out to the market, you maybe even get users. There's a whole era where a lot of building was product-led growth, right? So you give it away for free, you charge later. Yeah. But then you're terrified, like, is someone going to pay me?
Yeah.
And so to get that kind of feedback off of something super raw is super interesting. There's a lot we could unpack there. We've talked about how you avoided some conventional wisdom in Silicon Valley, but also like talking to your users, moving fast, like doing all that sort of stuff, very much what you were focused on. Walk us through the first 3 years of the company's life. You got to 2014, profitability, only raised $1.5 million. It's back in the water that a lot of founders are like, look, it's not cool to raise huge amounts of money. What's cool is to build something people want and scale revenue and grow cash efficiently. So what did it look like for you to pursue that journey when it was pretty atypical?
Yeah. Well, so first chapter, which is, probably a little less than a year, maybe like 6-9 months, is us nights and weekends. We've got day jobs. We're living in Columbia, Missouri. We're, after work going to get like takeout Chinese and then, trying to build as much of the product as we can, get users onto this thing, etc. There's not a lot of like, there's interesting stories, but there's not a lot of glamour to it. It literally is just putting in the work. It's just like going to the gym every day. And I think there were some novel things we did where it's like we sowed the seeds of our early like customer acquisition strategy. Like we knew how to use the app directory to drive search. and things like that. But the scale in which it was going is so minuscule, so small. And so the first year is that. Probably the next pivot point, which happens like 6-9 months in, is we apply to YC. And it's the second time getting applied, but the second time we get accepted. And so we quit our day jobs, we moved to the Bay Area, we're spending the next 3 months in the batch. And that is like, like we were hardworking before, the whole nights and weekends thing, like, it's not like we weren't giving a go at this, but there's something about like being in that batch, living in a, Spartan apartment in, South Bay, just waking up every morning and just like, this is all like live, breathe this stuff. And that's what it was for like the next 3 months. And so, that kind of concludes the first year. We're starting to have some success there. We have a little bit of revenue. I think by the end of the first year, we're making, I want to say it's like $6,000 at MRR. So, you do the math on that. Like that's not, it's not a lot of money, but it's something. It's something. And I think,
and you started charging from day one. You never had like a freemium.
Yeah, we were charging from day one. We did add a freemium element pretty quickly because we felt like a big part of Zapier was you do need to play with it. It was like a new type of product, a new way of building stuff. And we just felt like, man, if we could just get folks in and like messing around, learning the concepts on a free plan, that's going to help us over the long
initial
haul.
wow moment where you see something pop up from another system, just like you did with your first app.
Yeah, get you that aha moment. So we did add that in pretty quick. But that was, pre-YC, we were like, everything was paid. Post-YC, it was like, okay, we're going to introduce this free plan. We felt like we had a little bit of money in the bank, like a little bit of a cushion. Not much, but a little bit. Tail end of YC, we're making some money, but it's not enough to pay the rent. And so this is where we do raise the seed round, which nets out to be $1 million and change. And we put that in the bank account and we say,
what was it like to get that first yes? How many investors did you talk to? What was your learning running that process? You obviously chose not to do that process again. So that might say
I don't know that it was like particularly enjoyable. Like it's just sort of, we liked building software. We liked talking to customers, etc. The whole, like fundraising dog and pony show just felt like a side distraction to us.
Yeah.
I don't know that there was like that much that was memorable from our fundraise. We got, maybe the most novel thing was that most of the people we actually took checks from had reached out to us pre-YC. So it wasn't like demo day or anything like that, like drummed up a whole bunch of new interest. It was just, we went back and all the people who'd sort of like pinged us like inbound, we just said, hey, we're going to do a seed round now. Like if you're still interested, we'd love to chat with you. And, we got a bunch of no's from people. I don't think a lot of folks like particularly understood what we were doing at the time. It was kind of a weird thing, but there was a small batch of folks that like were, true believers, I think, and we're willing to, cut a check for that. And so we got that money. It was exciting. It was $1 million, like to see $1 million in a bank account. I never seen that before. And so like a kid from Missouri that grew up in the middle class, I was like, whoa, $1 million. Like I never thought that would be a thing. So, it definitely is like a cool feeling for sure. But I think in the back of our minds, we're like, treat this like it's the last money we ever had. Like we still have like a healthy amount of like VC skepticism. We want to maintain ownership and control of the company. We don't want to be in a position where, someone else is calling the shots, and tell us what we can and can't do. Now, the good thing is like, we're young. All three of us are like, have some tech chops. We're willing to like, we can do all the jobs inside of Zapier ourselves. And that, I think, is really what makes bootstrapping possible, is when you can do everything yourself, you don't have to go hire folks, because hiring is that's what really causes your burn rate to go sky high.
And you have an interesting philosophy on when to start hiring, at least in those early days.
Well, yeah, like we kind of developed a mantra, which was don't hire till it hurts. And so we wanted to do every job in the company, and we wanted to feel what that felt like. We wanted to understand, like, why is this role valuable? What is it contributing? How does it make the gears of this company turn? How does it contribute new customers? How does it retain them? All that sort of stuff. So for us, the first employee we ever hired was someone in customer support, because that's where we felt the pain the first. We would wake up and we would be doing customer support well into, 1, 2, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, which on one hand, like, was really useful because we were learning all the things that people are trying to use the product for and what they like, what's broken about it, etc. But on the other hand,
canonical YC advice: talk to users,
talk to customers. Yeah. But on the other hand, there's all these things that they wish was better about the software. And, by 3 in the afternoon, we're just like running out of hours in the day to actually go fix some of this stuff. And so we're like, let's just get one person in to help with customer support. And that will it'll just give us back, hours in the day that we can ship out more features. So that was the first person we brought in. And then over the course of that, second year, I think we brought in 2 other engineers, each like 3-4 months apart. And mostly the way in which we decided to do that was just looking at cash flow. I'd sort of just like eyeball, like, okay, we brought in about this much cash, an engineer cost about this much. We have someone that we'd like to bring in. Okay, we could probably do that in November. Okay, we could probably do that in about February. And so you just kind of like spacing things out, like keeping the bank account healthy, making sure the revenue's coming in, making sure the business is working. It wasn't this like crazy, like, sit down and like, I don't know, MBA, like financial modeling. It's just like basic. It's more like personal, like financial accounting than it is like a company at that stage. And that was, I think, how we kind of kept ourselves like on the straight and narrow. And it did have the side effect of like everyone that joined the company also really understood our customers. They really understood the business. We knew all those early employees, like they were really in it in the same way that we were in it. There was nobody twiddling their thumbs, nobody like, no wasted energy. It was all just towards the mission of the company. And then, year 3, I guess, to get to that, final, like, first $1 million in ARR, finally get to profitability. It really just was a continuation of that. It was like, well, we know what it takes to grow this thing. We need more integrations. More integration means more potential users, means more keywords we can rank for. Let's just get that flywheel going. And so that, second, third year, it was just, how do we just do as much of that as possible? We kind of figured out, the mechanics of how at least the early growth was going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the first 3 years through profitability, $1 million in ARR, keeping it pretty lean, very focused, talking to customers. I do want to talk about the go-to-market engine you built because it's pretty interesting. It's built a lot around SEO. There's also this question, is SEO dead in the future if it's going to be AIs who are going and, scraping the internet, doing a lot of different sort of stuff. But what was your go-to-market motion around SEO and why did the Zapier platform uniquely lend itself to that?
Yeah. A pretty common growth strategy for marketplace companies is SEO. You think about like restaurants in a particular city. You think about I don't know, like any city search like has this dimension, local search, but there's sort of just like any e-commerce, it's like red shoes. Like I want a product page for that. And I want to just like rank for all these things. Well, it turns out integrations kind of has that same flavor where I'm looking for a Zendesk Jira integration. I'm looking for a MailChimp Salesforce integration. I'm looking for this and that. And in 2011, if you did searches like that, there was no products for those searches. You would just find like bad API docs and like, old abandoned scripts on GitHub. Like it was kind of a wasteland. No, like it was not what a user was. When a user was searching for something, they weren't getting what they wanted. And so for us, the magic was that we said, hey, we think we can go tackle that. Those search rankings were bad. And so we felt like, okay, like if we can do just like a nice landing page, well designed, typical SaaS page, it's like, hey, you're looking for Zendesk Jira integration, like sign up here, get started free, here's how it will work, etc. That's probably a pretty good bet for us. And it'll scale up just add new integrations. We have new keywords, new landing pages, etc. we could go rank for. Now, of course, at the time, this strategy, no one was doing it. So we had like a good lead. Now, if you go try this stuff, like everybody's doing this thing. It's not particularly novel today, but at the time it definitely was.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit too. So SEO drove a lot of growth for a long time. And then you build the platform out over the intervening years to, I think you cover 8,000 different apps. You've got like 2.2 million businesses who are using Zapier to automate their work. What are you seeing today in terms of the AI use cases and how folks are finding use in the Zapier platform?
Yeah.
Now that everyone wants to build agents to do everything.
Yeah. AI has unlocked a whole host of interesting use cases. I think the reason why is it unlocks certain capabilities that were just really hard to do with a traditional deterministic API call. So for example, unstructured data is super common in a lot of applications. And, before AI, like you working with unstructured data on Zapier was really hard. Like we had some parsing tools and some things like that, but you couldn't do all that impressive stuff. Now you can feed into a Zap a big blob of text and you can ask an AI to do interesting things to it. Do you want to know the sentiment of it? Do you want to know interesting themes out of it? Do you want to extract contact information out of it? Whatever you want, whatever exists in there that you want to know about it, you can just query it like you'd query ChatGPT and say, tell me this stuff, and it'll spit it back out in a structured way. So now you can go do interesting things with it. Mm-hmm. Or the inverse is true. You can say, hey, I want to feed a bunch of structured information into a tool, and now I want it to go generate something based on all this structured information. So maybe I want to go have it compose an email or compose a memo or compose something based on all this stuff, which allows you to do a whole bunch of interesting like personalization or memo writing or lead enrichment or all these types of use cases that before were, like I said, it's like you could maybe hack your way to do some of this stuff, but most people were just like, I'm not going to do it. Probably a third thing too that is interesting is you also have AI search in the middle of this, which that also is incredibly powerful, where you can again feed it structured information, but then have it go out to the internet and say, hey, go look at all these things, and I want you to bring back a whole bunch of knowledge to me. And the search use cases just get better and better. This year is like the year of the agent, but the first agents have been these search agents, and these search agents are incredible. Like deep research is quickly become like one of my most favorite AI use cases, where I just like have it run and like research on a whole bunch of topics concurrently. So you have that is sort of like, the set of use cases number one. Now all that fits pretty cleanly into, what would be like a classic Zap inside of a Zapier.
Yep.
But the exciting thing that we've been working on is more of a pure agent side of the house, which that opens up the way to allow AI to do a whole bunch of capabilities purely with inference. So before with an agent, you're still having like Zapier trigger it this way, do this, then hit the AI, then again, do this. Very structured. You get a lot of reliability out of that. You get a lot of low cost out of this. So there's a lot of good things and reasons why you might still want to do it that way.
Yeah. So you spent 13 years building Zapier's set of integrations, and then recently you announced Zapier Agents. Yeah. So talk to us about what it is, how it works, how it's different, how it integrates with the rest of the tool suite. Because I do think, you have to reimagine your product in the age of AI, no matter who you are. And even for Zapier, who's in this amazing position, you're doing the same.
Well, so the exciting thing with agents is that there's a lot of use cases that don't fit the, classic, like, when this trigger happens, do this. You still probably have a trigger where it's like, hey, some event happens. It could be you as a user sitting down and waking the agent up, or some third-party system, you want to wake it up. But then what you want it to go do, it doesn't cleanly fit into like trigger this, and this. You kind of have like a set of tasks that you want it to go tackle, and you want to just describe it in more natural language. So I'll give you an example. I was trying to build a leaderboard for our sales team this last week, where at the beginning of the end of the month, I wanted to just say like, hey, here's an update on the leaderboard, and here's our top 3 folks, and here's some like in progress deals to like encourage people. That might sound like a kind of simple thing to do with a traditional Zap, but it's actually kind of complicated because you've got your trigger is just like end of the month, but then you're like, well, what is the action? It's like, well, go look up this table, but then extract a bunch of data and then publish it to Slack. And so you kind of have some determinism in there, but it's not exactly clear. Whereas with an agent, you can literally just say, hey, every month, I want you to go look at this table, and I want you to pull out the top 3 sales reps, and then I want you to write a message in Slack that celebrates them. It says something cool based on, something thematic from the month. And the agent just figures all that stuff out. I don't have to do anything else. Literally just, 3 bullet points. Like I was assigning it to a junior employee. I can just be like, hey, can you just go do this for me once a month? And it's like, sure, gotcha. Works. Easy peasy. And so that's where I think there's a lot of excitement around agents, is because the ease of use in which you can set these things up, the breadth of capabilities is a lot wider. And I think if you plug it into a tool like Zapier, you build your agents on a tool like Zapier, you have access to all of the tools that we support. 8,000 and change at this point in time. So it's early days still, but there's a lot of like pretty cool stuff getting built on top of agents.
Yeah. And people need to have agents that go and interact with the real world. That's where Zapier comes in, even if you're still using this kind of non-deterministic glue now that you have access to. Exciting for Zapier. I'm sure you're also terrified about the future of your business, because if you're a founder and you're not a little bit terrified, you're just not paying attention to how quickly things are changing. So what are you paying most attention to right now, and thinking about how that relates to where Zapier is going to be headed in the next couple of years?
It is, but you're spot on. Like, it is super exciting time, but also it is harder than ever, I think, to chart a course because of just the pace of things. It used to be you would get like, you have to reinvent your company every like 3 years. Now it feels like you kind of got to reinvent yourself every 6 months or something like that. The framework that we often are asking ourselves is, it really is like looking at the foundational models and trying to predict what do we think the next set of improvements are going to be from those models. And from a product point of view, you're trying to say, here is the set of features that we can develop that when the models improve, those features get way better. They get even more cost efficient. The quality goes up. The reliability improves. Those are the types of things that we really want to go invest a lot of time in contrast to the types of things that when the models improve, those features just disappear. The need for them is no longer necessary.
Yeah.
And so
this is another bit of advice YC has been giving founders, which I think is super useful, which is build stuff that doesn't quite work yet, but is going to start working. And you're like, oh, that's great advice. But then you realize it's really hard to answer what doesn't quite work, but will work. Like, you have to be pretty intentional in thinking through that, and then being prepared for that state of the world. It sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah,
at Zapier.
There's no way to do this, I think, effectively without just playing with the technology a lot. I'm like super nervous for the companies that are like, sort of played with ChatGPT once and were like, okay, it's not good now. We'll check it out 6 months from now. And then they kind of come back and dip their toes in a little bit there, where I'm just like, I don't think they're building like an intuition for like what these models are capable of, what these things can become, etc. Whereas the teams that are like living and breathing it and building features with it, even if features aren't that good yet, even if you're just sort of like, like it kind of doesn't work, or, you have to do all this like bike shedding to like kind of get it to work. The teams that are still like just doing that, I think are going to be the ones that are going to be able to fastest respond when the models take those like next capability sets forward. So I think that's
what are you doing to make sure your team builds that culture of playfulness, of just everyday integration of AI? Because this is something founders I invest in ask me. They're like, what should I be doing?
Yeah.
AI. One thing I say is you need to be using these tools, but it's one thing to say that, it's another to get the team to do that, to get that team to do that in a way that's eventually drives value, even if it's not driving value immediately.
Yeah. Okay, so I can list off a couple things, or a handful of things that we've done, but it has definitely been a continuous effort. I think when we first started with this would have been, ChatGPT launches. At that point in time, we're mostly just like sharing stuff in Slack and saying like, hey, check this cool thing out. It's interesting. You should be trying this stuff out. Like very suggestive, very just sort of like, hey, if you like tech, if you like interesting things, you might like this thing too, right? GPT-4 comes out, and that's where we're like, okay, we need to, like, this is way more interesting than we were giving, credit to like even 6 months ago, and the pace is happening so fast. So there, we called the code red. We halted the company for a whole week, and we said, we're going to do an AI hackathon. If you're in engineering, you're going to build with these tools. If you're not in engineering, you're going to go sign up for these tools, and you're going to play around with this stuff.
Yep.
That was the first big leap forward, where if you looked at adoption of AI at Zapier, it went from, probably 10% of the employee base using it on a like monthly basis to north of 50%. So there's a big spike in usage.
What is Zapier's AI tech stack? Is it Cursor, OpenAI, Deep Research, Claude? Like, what are the things that you're like, these are the things we're pulling?
Yeah, all of the above, yeah. We're using all of this stuff. We have a pretty rigorous evaluation system where, we have our, AI experts, data privacy team, legal team. They're sort of just like going through and, setting up rules, setting up systems, designing these things so that we can give the power to the employee base. And then within the employee base, we're trying to just continually encourage adoption of this stuff. And so there's partly it's organic, bottoms up, but I don't think you can just do the organic bottoms up. Like that's not going to get you where you need to go. You do need tops down pressure, and centralized pressure as well too. So, one of the things we've started doing internally is, we have a Zapier on Zapier effort where we have a centralized team that's going to various function. It's going to HR, it's going to marketing, it's going to, these teams and looking at their critical workflows. It's looking at like employee onboarding and offboarding. It's looking at the lead journey inside of the business. And it's saying, okay, what are the things that can be reinvented with a new set of capabilities? And it's combining the domain experts with some folks who have maybe like a higher level of deftness with these tools, which I think is really important. I think where a lot of companies are getting stuck is they do this organic bottoms up thing. They buy a bunch of ChatGPT license for folks, which is great. It's an incredible tool, but it's still limited to the individual user. Whereas I think a lot of the reinvention in these companies happens at the functional level. It's happening for employee onboarding and offboarding. It's happening with your IT help desk tools. It's happening at these layers.
Your customer success team.
Yeah, and those are bigger processes that take more effort to reimagine. Those are built by multiple people and teams. And so you do need like a group of people to swarm that problem and say, we're going to actually like take the time to reinvent this. This is not somebody who's going to sign up for a, ChatGPT or a random AI tool and kind of vibe code their way to the answer to that thing. It's something that, it takes a little bit of thought and care to get there. And so that's where we think having like a centralized group of folks that can quote go support these teams to roll those out. And so we've started doing that a lot internally, but we're even doing it with a lot of our customers now too, where we'll go to them and say, hey, like, we can help you reinvent these processes that you should be doing, but you just sort of are having a tough time getting started with it.
Something I've heard some other founders doing is you just institutionalize it into the types of employees you hire, and then once they're hired, what they're doing. So when you interview someone, you say, hey, how did you use this? How did you use AI at your last job? How would you use it here? Here's the question. And then, you can put it their evaluations. How did you make your job 10% more efficient in the last month using AI, right? And so there are ways you can build this stuff in. I know you've talked about you have your values, and you've done similar things with Zapier's values.
We're that institutional one. That is the latest thing we've added to the mix as well too. Is there's an AI screener for every job inside the company, and it's not like crazy sophisticated. Mostly it's just a have you done anything? Because most people haven't done much at all beyond just like, I played with ChatGPT. So if you've done anything else besides ChatGPT, you're already in like, probably the 90th percentile.
Yeah, the top 10%. And I think that's the other thing. It's not actually that hard to get people who have this proclivity. Yeah. So you should at least do that and get them to bring it in. And
I think it screens for a whole bunch of other stuff, right? It screens for people who have like high agency, who have curiosity. Like, so I think the question it's not just about AI fluency. You kind of get a set of characteristic traits that you probably want inside your company too.
Yeah. And I think Zapier has also been ahead of the curve about thinking where AI might be headed, especially with respect to AGI. Just give you an opportunity to give a shout out to what your co-founder Mike has done and is doing, I think would be great. And we're all benefiting from the work that he and Francois Chalet have done.
Yeah. So Mike started a nonprofit ARC Prize, which was a prize built on top of the ARC eval set that Francois had invented. I want to say, I'm going to get the
2019-ish 2019, is what I say.
Yeah.
I'm not sure though either.
Yeah, it's all pre, what we think of as like the sort of modern set of tools. But what did
LLMs were hyped for AI researchers like Francois Chalet, and not at all for the general public at that era.
The cool thing about the eval set here is it's different than other types of evals. So, eval sets are like meant to determine like the skill of an AI system at a particular task. And a lot of eval sets are, more, or at least the ones you mostly hear about are like academic eval sets, where it's like, how good are you at answering like school knowledge? It's like, do you know a lot about this, that, or the other?
How about the LSAT? How about like 12th grade math?
Coding tests, like things like that, things you might see in school. ARC is different. ARC is meant to be something that is quite easy for humans to do. It's not measuring like this, level of intelligence. It's these simple puzzles that like, match this pattern to this pattern. And, it's the type of thing, if you go to their site, you can go play around with this yourself and see that it's not that hard. Like, you could give this to, kids, and kids will be able to figure out these puzzles. These are not...
Yeah, human off the street, solve each of them in like a minute-ish, get an 80% plus score. You give it a state-of-the-art thing, you throw like $1,000 of compute at it.
Yep.
Scores like 20%, 30%.
Well, that was the crazy thing about this eval set, is that up until the O series from OpenAI, the performance of these AI systems on ARC were really low. Humans would score like 85%, but the AI systems had reached like 20%, something like that.
Yeah.
So all the scale up, all this pre-training we were doing wasn't resulting in improvements on ARC specifically. Now that has changed with the O series and these reasoning models. The reasoning models are performing much better on ARC's eval set. And that's the first major improvement against that we've seen. And since that
to me was the biggest AI news last year was Francois Chalet, when he's kind of a LLM skeptic about their ability to scale. And then he saw the performance on his own benchmark go up, still not nearly human level, and still not nearly at the cost that would make it economical. Yeah. But he's like, we need to update our thinking on how just LLMs might approach AGI.
And so I think the interesting thing to consider next is what other evals need to exist in the world that for humans, it's quite easy to do these things, but for these AI systems, it's quite hard. And if you hear Sam and, Dario and other of these like frontier research leaders talk about this, they'll talk about how challenging this is. Like there's just not enough evals out there these days. And the evals that do exist tend to measure academic knowledge. And so there need to be more, I guess, eval inventors out there that are coming up with these things that make it useful to measure an AI system on some dimension of knowledge. And I think this gets more and more important the closer we get to AGI, because the tools are getting really good. They're starting to cover more and more types of tasks. But, even just in my own usage, and I think in humans' own interest of these tools, you still find things where you're like, gosh, like you're so impressive on so many dimensions. And then there's these things that you're just like, yeah, but it kind of sucks at this. And that's kind of what I think is unique about it's a unique type of intelligence that's being created here.
Yeah, so really appreciate what Mike is doing with the ARC AGI Prize and some other stuff too. He's exploring with Francois, I think, some non-LLM based architectures to try and drive AGI. The original question we were exploring was like, how do you as a founder think about reacting to the world where AI is changing? So I guess the takeaway from this is this would be another eval set to pay attention to if you're not already paying attention to. And I think another thing I'm always listening for, and comes from Francois and Mike, is like, if a non-LLM architecture starts to hit any of these benchmarks, that's going to be super interesting. Because then all of a sudden, what does scaling even mean? Like, we don't even know because it's like a fundamentally new set of approach. And now that LLMs have worked so well, maybe we're going to see billions thrown at other kinds of problems. I'm going to bring it back and just make it a little more mundane. One of the other big questions I have for you is, product-led growth for a long time for you, but you've also had to crack into enterprise. And so you've got kind of two big things going on. You've got what's going on with AI, what's going on with Zapier Agents, but another big motion for you is, how do I actually take this product I've built and sell it to enterprises? Because enterprises are going to be one of the big people using and applying these AI agents, just like you're using it internally to automate your HR flows.
Yep.
There are a lot of Fortune 100 companies who would love to figure out how to automate huge pieces of work within their enterprise. So I'm curious how you're approaching an enterprise go-to-market, which is very, very different, and then what you're seeing about the type of stuff that people want to build with Zapier.
Yeah, it definitely is very different. I think the conventional wisdom would suggest it's easier for a PLG company to go enterprise than it is for an enterprise company to go PLG. I think when you hear that conventional wisdom, you think, oh, as a PLG company, it must be easy to go enterprise. No, it's not easy. It might be easier than the other way, but the degree of difficulty is still hard on both. And I think that the big lesson learned for me so far is that, with a PLG motion, your buyers have known problems. They're usually willing to tinker and dabble and build things on their own, put their fingers on the keyboard, and they already have a solution in mind. They know what they're going to go make. They're looking for a set of tools that can go deliver upon that. And so you're attracting a certain type of person into your customer based on that. Whereas when you go sell to an enterprise, they may not even have a problem in mind, let alone a known solution. And so the starting spot is just very different in what you're going after. And so, the like classic way that we often talk about it internally is, we use the Lego metaphor where, PLG is like you're buying a big old box of Lego blocks and they're all scattered all over the floor and your users are just there like having a good time figuring out how to invent castles and crazy stuff. Whereas on the enterprise side, they're looking for the Lego kit. They're looking for the Millennium Falcon that says like, here's how you go get this and here's how you go deliver on this, etc. And so for us, the big
One way I articulate that is you don't become a product company, you become a solutions company, right? Yeah. And so like, how do you build that solution-oriented motion mindset, build that into a sales org? Yeah, so talk us through like what you're doing.
Well, and this is where I do think PLG companies do have an advantage, is that you have all these users. And so you can look at the things that they have built and you can, figure out what the most common use cases are, what the most common industries are, and those can be the starting solutions. You can say, okay, these are the use cases we need to go advocate for. This is the way in which we want to go do it with these customers. And so when you go knock on somebody's door, or heck, when someone signs up for the product that's from one of those companies, you can say, hey, I got some suggestions for you on how you can get the most out of this platform. Here's the problems that you should be paying attention to. Maybe you showed up for this problem, but actually this other one, that's where you're going to get a lot of leverage out of it. And so it does require you to really spend a lot more time understanding those outlier use cases, the like high value things that are coming in from your, most sophisticated users, which, maybe sounds obvious, but it took us a bit to sort of crack that code.
Yeah. Do you have any stories of companies starting to use Zapier at the enterprise level that you could share just to give a sense of the types of problems they're working on?
Yeah, well, we're working with Okta. Okta uses us in a big part of their customer success organization to streamline a lot of data handoff. So you can imagine in a customer journey, you've got a lot of your customers are talking to different teams all the time, and one of the biggest hurdles teams have is that there's a handoff. It goes from sales into customer support or customer success, etc. And that person gets on the call with the customer and starts asking a bunch of questions where they're like, I've told you guys this. What are we doing here? And so, making sure that the notes that get entered into Salesforce get fed down into the customer success system and they get summarized, and the call notes that are coming in from Gong get sent over there, means that whoever's showing up on the call with the customer is looking like they know what they're talking about versus having to relearn everything from ground one. So that solves a huge amount of headaches for them. ActiveCampaign does a very similar setup as well too, where they're using us to streamline a lot of stuff across their client handoffs, things like that. Another great use case is we got a large insurance company that uses us to manage client onboarding. And a lot of compliance work. So those are two big use cases inside of insurance that are really, really important. Is you've got a new client showing up, and you got to collect a whole bunch of information from them from a bunch of different systems. You got to get them fed into a certain spot, and you got to do that quick.
Let's be honest. You've got an existing client showing up, applying for practically the exact same thing a year later.
Yeah. So all those use cases are, in insurance, a lot of those are manual flows. Those are time consuming. They happen across a bunch of disparate systems. So that's a place where Zapier solves. The other thing inside of a lot of these insurance companies, but this one in particular, is they have a lot of compliance work as well too. Similarly, compliance work is filling out forms, submitting paperwork. It's making sure that things happen at the right time. Again, those are a lot of manual flows, manual systems. And with a tool like Zapier, you can set up alerts to say, okay, this is the date this thing is required. Here's what we need. Do we need to go send an email out to the customer to collect X information from them? If so, here's a form that they can go submit all this stuff to. When they fill out this form, it can go create the paperwork in this system. Maybe it needs to generate a PDF, and then that PDF needs to get submitted to this agency. And so all those flows, again, very manual, happen across disparate systems, often require an interaction with the client to collect some of those things, and are very important. If you get your if your compliance isn't up to speed, that can be pretty risky for these insurance companies to do well. So those are a handful of use cases that I think are pretty pervasive across industries.
Yeah. And there's so many use cases I know in financial services, which is a market I think about all the time. You get on a phone with a bank and they ask between 2 departments or 3 departments the exact same information across every single one to open.
Yeah, it's why are you asking me this again? You shouldn't. You know the answer to this, but the reason they don't, well, that system is over here has one set of information. That system over here is a different set of information.
Yeah. A lot of founders that I work with are either starting enterprise go-to-markets or working on breaking into enterprise. How did you learn that motion? Who did you go to? What advice did you find to be useful, or sources of advice? And I know if you're doing enterprise, you're always on the learning curve on how to get better at enterprise. So it's not a destination, it's a journey. But how did you get started on that journey, and what were the most helpful stops along the way?
I think I've learned a lot from, folks like, Jason Limkin writes a lot about this for SaaS companies. We have Jay Simons on our board, who was the president at Atlassian for a long time, king of PLG, motions. One sort of hack that Zapier has is we have this big ecosystem of partners. And so a lot of those partners have figured out enterprise. So I just email them and be like, hey, can you tell me how it worked for you?
Yeah.
And so you pick up a lot of the playbooks and the tips and tricks from there. What I have found is in having a lot of those conversations, heck, also interviewing a lot of VPs of sales, VPs of marketing, things like that, just, trying to hear how they've done it. What I have found is, yes, there's a lot of playbooks and there's a lot of consistency in the playbooks, but in almost every company, there is something that's novel. There's a hook. There's something in there that had to be invented. And I think that's what makes this a unique challenge, because you look at any of these companies, you're like, this isn't rocket science. Like it all kind of works more or less the same way, but underneath it all, there is something in there that, can't be replicated by another company, which is what makes it so hard to shift these models from, company to company. And that I think is where we've had to do just a lot of learning, is understanding okay, what is a unique sauce for us that gives us a right to win and really gets that customer engaged and over the finish line and excited to, solve a bunch of automation problems with Zapier.
Yeah. Another question I want to ask you, because I love your answer, is how did you decide to be a remote company? I think a lot of people over intellectualize this, and you just have a very practical perspective.
Yeah, I think we kind of just played to the cards that we were dealt. So we'd moved to California, the three founders. Mike was his then girlfriend, now wife, was in law school, and so he went back to Missouri. And we're not going to kick him out of the company. He's too important. So now we're working in one person in Missouri, two people in California. So kind of got a little bit of a remote setup. We were going to hire that first support rep, and we're asking for advice on how to hire people. And the common or a good set of advice that we thought we got was hey, if you're not sure how to interview and hire people, just hire people you've worked with before. That'll de-risk some stuff.
Yeah.
Well, turns out the people we work with, they're back in the Midwest. They're not in California. So, first support rep we hire is a former roommate of mine who's in Chicago, who I just knew really well because I knew he ran a big Chicago Cubs message board. I'm like, if you can handle unruly Cubs fan, you'll be fine in support. It was kind of just the logic on that. Then, we're definitely cost conscious. We have this don't hire till it hurts mentality, this bootstrap mentality, and we're not particularly keen to go toe to toe with Google and Facebook on hiring Bay Area engineers.
Yep.
Whereas we know who the biggest employers are in Central Missouri, and we know what they pay Central engineers, and we're like, that's we can beat those rates. We can provide those folks an amazing salary.
Yeah.
And still be a much significant cost saving than trying to build an office setting in the Bay Area. So we just kind of looked across those dimensions. Plus, there was a handful of companies that were starting to do this. GitHub was pretty famously remote. Mm-hmm. Basecamp, 37 Signals was doing this. There was many others, not a huge amount, but enough that there was starting to be a little bit of a playbook where we kind of looked at all those factors and we're just like, you know what? I think for us, I think we can pull this off. And I think it actually will allow us to build the company in a way that will just be more efficient over the long haul.
Yeah. And I love it too. He's like, I don't want to deal with real estate. I want to focus on building
that
business.
Part too.
And that's such a practical answer. It really does depend on the company if that strategy makes sense to you. You don't have to over-intellectualize it. You have to focus on
We liked building product. We like talking to customers. I don't want to do real estate. I don't want to do investors. I don't want to do those things are side shows to the main show. And it's I want to work on the main show.
Yeah. And so much in life, and certainly in starting a company, is staying focused. Yeah. I want you to give advice that you think is relevant from the Zapier story for founders who are thinking about building something new today. But I also want you to call out what parts of the Zapier journey you think would not work today. Like maybe today, waiting 3 years to scale to your first level, million in ARR. It's I don't know, maybe that's too slow. The world seems to be changing fast, Yeah. SEO is a strategy. I don't know, maybe AI kills SEO. You can't depend on that strategy anymore. But what are some of the elements that you do think matter, and especially are maybe underappreciated by founders who are building in the Bay Area?
I think the small teams achieving a lot is easier than ever. I think with AI, with agents, with automation, with all these tools, you can get so much farther. Yeah, of course, with Zapier, you can just get so much farther with way less skills. And that, I think, makes it a lot easier to keep your head count low And so I think the whole like seedstrapping wasn't a word when we were doing it. Like it was like people didn't know what we were. We were this like weird
Natasha
oddity.
coined that like a month ago, so good for her. I think it's a great term.
I've heard it like all over the place since that came out. But when we did this, we were just like we were weirdos. But now it's like it's in vogue. Like people, and I think it's not in vogue for like trendy reasons. I think it's in vogue because it's like, you can actually do this now. And it's a really good way to build a company. So that feels very durable. The don't hire till it hurts stuff, like that feels super smart in this world, to be leaning more on technology and tools and things like that versus just throwing more bodies at problems. All that feels super durable. And as a result, I think like the approach to fundraising also makes a ton of sense as well too. Maybe not for every company, but probably for most companies. I think there's a very small number of companies. There always was a small number of companies, but an increasingly small number of companies that need just gobs and gobs and gobs of cash. What's different? I mean, look, the remote work setup, distributed work setup, I think that's more of a personal taste thing. You do you. Like whatever, like we played the cards that were dealt us. I don't, there's a lot of religious wars that sort of spark out over that, I think. And, I don't know. I think you're sort of, as a founder, your personal proclivities probably trump any of the like academic research on the topic. So just do what feels comfortable to you. Would probably be my guidance there.
My strong opinion is founders can do whatever they want. If you're a super junior employee though, you're hearing this debate and you're not realizing it doesn't apply to you because they're thinking about different problems. If you're a junior employee joining a company, you bet your ass you want to be in person, right? That's would you agree with that? Like if you're just like your experience early on at YC, like that experience of being together with a bunch of other cohort mates.
I think that's probably true. Like I think when you're young, when you don't have a ton of family responsibilities and things like that, I do think you get a lot out of your career being surrounded by people who, you can learn a lot from, you can up-level your ambitions from, you can build a network with. I do think that that's probably pretty impactful. Is it for 100% of early career folks? I don't know about that, but
no,
I think it's probably the right move for most people.
And those people who it's not for, they probably know, right? They're probably living online in some sort of rich community where they're communicating like they already know their community is online, but there are a lot of young people who that's not the case.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on. The marketing strategy, search, things like that, there are places where SEO is still going to be a great bet. SEO is definitely changing a lot, but I think marketing, growth, that's every strategy, every tactic has a short shelf life. Yeah. And so if you're not constantly reinventing the wheel there, you're going to have a tough time. Like I think every company has to go just figure that part out on your own. There's not a lot of, I'm going to go compete with Zapier. Let's go learn exactly what they did and do it exactly the way Zapier did it. That's probably not going to work for you. You got to find something different. Now, you might see, you might look at Zapier and go like, oh, that's interesting. My company's in a totally different space. No one is doing it that way. And there's a whole gap in the market. I could copy the Zapier playbook and port it over to this other area and have some success. That I think is a pretty astute move. But it requires you to sort of like be observing a bunch of different things, and like sort of carrying interest from one domain over to a different domain. I think that's a pretty good way to like spot ideas and opportunities.
Yeah. Translational learning is, you've got to be good at that if you want to build something new and different. Well, awesome. This has been a great conversation. I think Zapier has been a really interesting company. I think it continues to be, given everything that's going on with AI. And I really appreciate all of your thoughts today. It's been great having you on.
Thanks, Rex. This was a blast.